Hey, what's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Get Over Yourself podcast. I'm your podcast host, Brandon Davis, and sitting next to me today, if you guys are either watching or listening to today's episode of the Get Over Yourself podcast on whatever your preferred streaming platform is, I have Jayson Downing sitting next to me. Jayson's an author, and in today's episode, we're going to be diving a little bit into his book, The Reawakening of the Warrior Spirit. He has 5 virtues that he presents for everybody here on this earth to kind of perfect and become a better version of themselves. But before we jump full force in today's episode, I want to share a quick scripture with you all. It's found in James chapter 1, verse 5. This is one of my favorite scriptures of all time. It says, "If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God that giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him." Guys, whatever worries, fears, questions, or concerns you may have inside of your life, don't be afraid to go ask God. Say a prayer, talk it out with him. I promise it will get better. You will receive answers, and your life will become stronger. But before we jump full force, also, Jayson, tell us a little bit more about yourself. You're calling in from San Diego, California, just a little south of where I grew up. Beautiful area. It's my ultimate goal for my wife and myself to retire in San Diego. What's the weather like down there right now?
It's not bad. It's, pleasant. I think probably 60 degrees outside right now. It's 8 a.m. in the morning, so I'm sucking down some Go juice right now. Got a little coffee next to me. And we're looking to have a beautiful day outside. It's been raining the past couple months, but today's looking like a nice day.
That's what I hear. My parents are still living just a little bit north of you, and they're saying it's raining almost every day. And I'm thinking that's not the California I grew up in, but good for California, I guess.
It's been a little weird, and parts of San Diego. I don't know if you know, like the Point Loma area. There's a few areas that are definitely closer to sea level. A couple of those rainstorms, they were actually like flooded out.
Man.
Some buddies showed me videos of like they were trying to bike home from work, and there was really like a foot of water just like rushing down the street. So
that's nuts.
Yeah.
Good for California, though. But hey, we'll see in 5 more months. They're still probably going to claim that they're in a drought and everyone needs to cut back on water usage again.
It's endlessly.
That was like the story of my life growing up in
yes.
California. It's endlessly in a drought, exactly. Well, good stuff, Jayson. Guys, be excited because of these 5 virtues. Jayson's going to be teaching us a lot today on how you can improve your lives. So let's jump into today's episode. So Jayson, reawakening the warrior spirit. Tell us a little bit about it, kind of some of your framework, and then also leading up to it. It's not like in somebody's life, in your life, you just said one day, okay, I all of a sudden want to write a book. What led you to that journey? What led you to wanting to write this book? What were some of the experiences you went through inside of your life where you were like, I have to share this message with anyone who wants to listen?
Yeah, so a little bit about me first. I went to college up in Santa Barbara. That's where I did my undergrad, and I was studying political science. And at that time, the Iraq War and Afghanistan War were still very big concerns on the global stage. And I just remember kind of inside my own heart wanting to do my part, whatever that part was. I wasn't sure exactly what that looked like, but I wanted to do my part to try to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. I heard a lot of people on the news, in social media platforms, around college campus, everybody had their own opinions about what should happen. But I wanted to hear like from the people who were actually there, who were actually making a difference, what they were seeing on the ground and how I could, be a part of the solution. And so that really led me to, in my sophomore year, I went to a 10-week training course with the Marines. And I decided to, what is this about? I want to figure out what it's like to actually serve and to be with some of the best of the best. I had always wanted to push myself and to see what I could accomplish. And so that drove me to the Marines to see, basically what I was made of. And I just loved the ethos that I was taught there. And so that's the ethos, by the way, that drives a good portion of the book. And so after I graduated college, I went into the Marines. I was in the Marines for 5 years. I did a couple different deployments. I did a 12-month deployment to Afghanistan, and then I did a subsequent deployment as a platoon commander for a scout sniper platoon. and ended up getting out of the Marines as a captain. So I had spent time overseas in a combat area. I had spent time as a platoon commander. I'd really had a wide range of really great leadership challenges, leadership experiences. And I just felt like it was time for me to move on to kind of like the next mission statement of my life, which then I ended up moving into grad school and meeting the gal that would eventually become my wife. And so now I have a little one, and so now I'm moving on to that next mission statement of my life. But so that's a little bit of background about me. What drove me to write the book was, a couple of years ago, something happens that you may have heard of. It was called COVID. During that lockdown period, we were all losing our minds, and the world seemed to be, I don't know if it was like this for you, but it just seemed to me like the world seemed to be pulling itself apart. There was a lot of division, a lot of anger, and a lot of depression out there. And at the time, I was also working part-time as a college professor. And so I was teaching classes, online. And so I was dealing with those young 18 to 22-year-old age range, that I had been back when I was in college, obviously. And I saw a lot of desperation. And the COVID hit everybody hard, but I think it hit that age range particularly hard as they're looking to get their education, then move out into the workplace and try to figure out where they belong. Like, how do I make a difference? Just like I had wanted to make a difference back when I was young. They want the same thing, but kind of the message they were getting was that wasn't possible, or maybe that that they wouldn't be able to make a difference. And so I decided, during that time period, I just started writing down my thoughts. And it was actually the only way I could get to bed at night, because I was so wound up in my head. All I could do was just journal, get everything out, and then I was able to sleep. And what happened is my wife, my girlfriend at the time, she picked up the journal and she was reading some of it. And she said, "This is really good. You should really consider writing a book." And so that was the genesis story of how the book came about. Is I started thinking, what do I have to offer to a generation out there that is maybe a little depressed, maybe a little lost, maybe a little angry, and is looking for a way to impact the world around them in a positive way. And so I started, when I came out of college, I was very freely given a way of living. And I call that the warrior spirits in the book. This ethos that I try to communicate, that was given to me. It was communicated in training. It was communicated in mentorship. It was communicated when I was overseas on deployment. These senior officers, senior enlisted, that would invest in me and tell me, this is the way we do things in the Marines. This is the way we do things. This is how we take personal responsibility. This is how we choose to live our lives and be a little bit different. And I loved that. It's what kept me in the Marines. And so now that I'm out, and I think it's just what I have to offer. It's this is what has worked for me. This is what has really propelled my life forward, even in the dark times when I got out of the Marines and I felt lost and I was kind of spiraling. There was a time when that happened. This is, these getting back to these core principles, these virtues I talk about, is what lifted me out of those dark times. And so that's what I'm trying to present to the people who read the book.
Nice. I appreciate that. And I got to ask too, it sounds like some of your military, like what kind of pushed you to join the Marines right off the get-go, was just kind of your drive. You wanted to be surrounded with these fine gentlemen, this kind of leadership structure that would shape you into kind of a stronger and more dedicated man. Was there like some sense of patriotism that was behind that as well? I mean, like you said, Iraq was very big at the time. I mean, obviously there's still conflict in the Middle East right now, but when you were going in, that was kind of the hot word. Were you just going in simply to become better, or were you like, oh, I love the USA, I'm like patriot through and through?
Definitely. I grew up in a family that was very patriotic, and so that is definitely instilled in my blood. And just it's the way I see the world. I remember growing up, I had the good fortune to be able to travel a good deal with my family. We would take frequent trips down to Mexico or to other countries. And I remember, seeing, driving past poor areas of Mexico, seeing like kids playing with a soccer ball out in the street. And that's all they had. That's all they had to play with. And my parents would tell me, you grow up in an area where you're very, very privileged,
Mm-hmm.
And so be grateful of that. Not everybody has that. Not everybody has all of the benefits that we do. And the thing is, I didn't grow up rich. I grew up, part of my life was spent um, in a 30-foot motorhome because my parents were saving for a house. You know, the price of houses out in California, it's a little crazy. So I definitely wasn't rich, but compared to other parts of the world, I was rich, and I
Mm-hmm.
never went a day without wanting anything. So there was definitely that sense of like gratitude when I come to, you know, growing up in the United States, the freedoms, the privileges that we have. And so that would definitely played a role. So when you mentioned patriotism, it was definitely there. It was
Mm-hmm.
that combined with that sense of, I want to push myself and I want to see what I'm capable of. So I'm going to, you know, I could have gone in any number of directions, but I chose the Marines.
I love it. I love it. And there's a couple stories I got to share too, based on what you were saying there. First and foremost, I feel like today, and I appreciate you being open about this. Maybe it was because you're in the military, so it's obviously kind of drained into your blood a little bit more. But so many people these days are afraid to say they're patriotic. It's like a bad narrative to have these days, and
Yeah.
that cannot be our thoughts whatsoever. We need to continue standing up for this nation. Obviously, America has made a lot of poor choices, but we've also done incredible good inside of this world.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, thank you for sharing that. I know I kind of grew my sense of patriotism when I was a little bit younger. You're from San Diego. You live in San Diego right now, so you're probably a Padre fan. I'm a Dodger fan, though. We can be friends for just this episode. But I remember growing up, like my most influential guy, my favorite player was Justin Turner on the Dodgers. And it was because when I was younger, I was at a spring training game and he called me out onto the field and I played catch with them and he signed a bunch of baseballs and stuff for me. It was the coolest moment for any young baseball fans' dreams. And growing up, so Justin Turner's my man. You know, I have his jersey, I got all this stuff. And every single game, when, you know, any major sporting event, be that the NFL, MLB, whatever it is, they generally have some sort of the pre-game where they say, if you served in the military or you were a police officer or X, Y, or Z, please stand. And then everyone cheers, you know, then we sing the national anthem. Everyone's hyped up. I just remember every single time at the Dodger games, and they still do this to this day, they honor a military hero of the game. And I know that's something San Diego does very well too, because that's there's a lot of military inside that town.
Yep.
And so after the Dodgers would go and honor one of these members of the military, somebody retired, somebody who was injured in combat, you know, changes every game, Justin Turner would walk up and he would give a signed baseball every single game, every single home game. He'd walk up to whoever the military honoree of the game was. He'd give them a signed ball and shake their hand and get a picture with them. And I was like, as I was younger, I was always thinking about that. I'd be like, okay, he was just doing that to be nice. But here he is asking the person who was in the military, that honoree, if he could get a picture with them. Like normally it would be the exact opposite. You know, he's the famous ball player. He's the one everybody wants to kind of be like and get that picture with him. But he was the one going out and seeking that photo, which I just thought was amazing. And that instilled a lot in me when I was younger. But going back to your previous point where, and I appreciate you saying this as well, not very many people are open about this on podcasts, but here in the US, the poorest of the poor are still beyond blessed compared to a lot of other people in South America and other countries throughout the world. I remember when I was living in Brazil, I was there for a year, and I just remember some of these areas, there would be 2-3 entire families living inside of one house. And it just shocked me every single time. I'm like, here's 12, 13, 14, 15 people in a single home. You know, maybe there's 2-3 bedrooms, small kitchen, small living room. Like people are stacked on top of each other to go to bed at night. Yet they were so happy. And so I've talked about this before on the podcast, but with you, Jayson, just pointing that out, I just got to put that out there as well. We don't have to have everything in this world to be happy. What we need are relationships. We need these friendships, and we need this kind of heart inside of us that's willing to accept these circumstances and just play them as best as we can. And that's what's going to bring us true happiness. But going forward, Jayson, obviously getting back to your book, inside of Reawakening the Warrior Spirit, you talk about 5 different virtues to kind of do exactly that, reawake your warrior spirit. So talk a little bit about those virtues, what they mean, and why they're so important.
Sure. So, you know, these are the 5 virtues that I found that are become most, you know, shall we say, problematic in our modern culture. And you kind of alluded to some of the trends that are going on in our society. So I tried to to address those kind of upfront. The name of the book is Reawakening the Warrior Spirit, and then the subtitle is Exploring What It Means to Be a Warrior in the Modern West. And I put that in intentionally because I don't want to just have very general statements about what it means to be a warrior in all times and places, but rather to center that in our modern culture where we live right now, and just answer some of those kind of burning questions of what does it mean to be a warrior in our culture right now in our modern day and age, because that's a different question than it may have been in previous times. Some of the virtues remain the same, but the application looks a little bit different. So the first virtue that I go through is the service mentality. It's otherwise known as like the servant leader mentality. And this is the mentality that's drilled into you day one when you step onto the Marine Corps training grounds in Quantico, Virginia, is that it's not just about you, right? Stop being an individual. Stop only thinking about yourself. We live in a society where we are very individualistic, at least compared to other cultures. We sometimes seem to lose that sense of family and togetherness, that respect for older generations, where it's just very present in places. Like when I went to Mexico, it was definitely present there. It's present in a lot of South American cultures, a lot of East Asian cultures, but a lot of Western cultures. We, on the plus side, we have a lot of individual rights, individual freedoms, but we can sometimes tend to denigrate, like you said, those family relationships and forget about our place within the broader community. So that's what that chapter really explores. It's, on the one hand, we have two extremes in our modern society. One which wants to pull us into a very tribal direction where we're pigeonholed into a specific group, largely based on identity characteristics, the color of your skin, your race, your sexuality, your biological sex. They want to tell you what you can do, what your background is, what you should believe, how you should vote, what privileges you have, what oppressions you have to deal with, et cetera, et cetera. Right. Put you in a box and say you're part of this group and you're nothing but an avatar of this group. We know all about you because we know what group you're in. And I completely disagree with that. And I make a strong case against that point of view in this chapter. That would, I think, be like that service group mentality taken to the extreme. On the other side of that, we have the individualistic mindset, which says I'm not part of a group. I care only about myself. And it's more or less a narcissistic mindset where you're completely divorced from any sort of social responsibility or social grouping, not recognizing the broader responsibility that you have to your community, to your family, to even your nation. And so in my mind, the service mentality, the servant leader mentality really kind of sits in the middle of those two extremes, in that it acknowledges you as an individual. The Marines make sure you know that you are absolutely responsible for your own actions, for your own development, your own your own responsibilities within the platoon. There's a list of responsibilities that you have, and you absolutely take care of that as an individual. And as a leader, you need to recognize the individual traits of each one of your the people in your group, their strengths, their weaknesses, if you want to be able to lead them effectively. So you understand their individuality, but at the same time, you bring them together with a common purpose, a common mission, and that is the mission statement that platoon has. So you recognize your individual responsibility, but you broaden that also to a social responsibility as well. So that's kind of the dynamic that I discuss in that first chapter, that servant leader mentality and how it plays out in our modern society. The second chapter I go into, or the second virtue, I should say, I go into the topic of truth. Rather complicated idea in our modern culture. What is truth? Does everybody have their own truth? Can I say that my truth and your truth are different, or one is better or inferior to the other, et cetera, et cetera? So I can just say that living an honest life is absolutely essential to living a good life. So what does honesty mean? What does truth mean within our modern culture? That is what that chapter explores. I can say that one of the quickest ways to get yourself thrown out of military training, Marine Corps training, with the request that you never return, is what they call an integrity violation. If you breach your integrity, you make a lot of mistakes when you're in training. a lot of tactical mistakes. They send you out into the woods. You're supposed to attack an objective, in a battle-like scenario, and you have the instructors there. They're going to tell you every single thing that you did wrong. So that way you can learn from that and become a better version of the platoon leader in the future, right? You make your mistakes in training so you don't make them on the battlefield. And as long as you learn from your mistakes, you can make mistakes, and that's fine. They're forgiven. Sometimes they're even encouraged, as we prefer you make mistakes in training as opposed to out on the battlefield. But the one mistake that isn't forgiven is that's a breach of your integrity. If you start lying, because what's going to happen is if you're lying and you're untrustworthy in training, why would we ever trust you when you're out in the stress of combat? You can't be trusted there. So, and you're cheating yourself, you're cheating the people around you out of the full potential that they can get from their training. If you're not living up to your own potential, you're not owning up to your mistakes, and you're trying to skirt the rules that have been agreed upon as the rules of engagement in a training scenario. So that's.
And let me just say real quick too, Jayson, that scenario you just gave, such practical advice for all of our lives. If we're cheating ourselves, if we're not even being honest with ourselves, let alone what we tell to other people,
right,
inherently we're not going to be able to grow. Obviously, this podcast is all about, becoming a better version of yourself, getting out of your comfort zone and whatnot. Guys, you have to be truthful with everything that is going on inside of your life. If not to anyone else, be truthful to yourself. You have to look at yourself in the mirror and see how it is, or else you're never going to make those important changes. So that principle you just talked about, Jayson, so amazing. I love it. I love it.
Well, I say this, that you can lie to yourself all you want when you're in peacetime, right? Whatever that peacetime is in your life, right? When the times are going well, you can lie to yourself. You can twist and warp the fabric of reality all you want. But when the storms hit, or when you're out on the battlefield, when the battle eventually comes your way, reality is going to smack you in the face. That's what's going to happen. The more that you've warped reality in peacetime, the harder the smack's going to be. That's just the way it is. I like this definition. As people say, what is reality? Well, here's a definition. Reality is what still exists even when you stop believing in it. So, for example, in training, I knew a couple of guys. They set out on a very long training event it was very hot. We were in the middle of summer, and they set out without enough water. And they didn't think that they needed enough water, or as much water as the instructors had told us. And that was their truth, or however you want to say it, right? Well, they ended up becoming heat casualties, right? They had to be medevaced out because they ran out of water and their bodies overheated. So it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if you don't believe something. Reality is eventually going to catch up to you. That's a very simplistic example, but it's one that people can understand, right?
Yeah.
Let's see. The third virtue I talk about is this dynamic between strength and power. I kind of talk about them both in that same chapter. I say that strength is a capability. It's something that you develop over time. Power is what happens when you apply your strength and your capabilities to the world around you in order to affect it in a positive way. And so I see power as coming directly from individual capabilities. The stronger you are, the more potential you have to affect the world around you. So by all means, become the strongest possible version of yourself that you possibly can. That's my encouragement. Whether that be physically, getting in weightlifting, or going on runs, taking care of yourself, eating right. I think that that's oftentimes the bedrock. Like, that's where people can start if they're looking to strengthen themselves. It's not that it's the most important form of strength, because we also have mental strength, you have emotional strength, you have spiritual strength. But I find that if you don't know where to start, sometimes, you just say, well, become mentally strong. It's like, well, how? I can't control my thoughts all the time, but what I can control is my body. I know I can force my body to do something, right? I know I can force myself to get up and go for a run, or to get up and go and lift something heavy, or to go climb a mountain. And so that's what happens in military training, is that you get pushed to all these physical extremes. Now, one reason for that is because obviously the military is a physical endeavor. You have to be physically fit. But the other reason for that is that when you get pushed to your physical extremes, that's when other weaknesses start to show up and become more apparent. Weaknesses of character, weaknesses of your mental, your emotional strength, even your spiritual strength gets tested when your body gets pushed to the max. So this is where I encourage people, just get out and do something hard. Do something hard. I don't care what it is. Whether if you want to write a book, if you want to climb a mountain, if your dream is to go and hike the John Muir Trail, by all means, go and do it. Find whatever it is for you, but challenge yourself, because that's where you're going to build up that physical strength, that mental, emotional, spiritual strength along that journey. And along with building strength and going through that adversity, you're also going to develop a greater perspective on life. Your perspective is going to change. Those hills around you, once you've climbed one mountain, all the other mountains around you don't look quite as big.
So true.
You know that you just
so
climbed
true.
that mountain, right? You have that to look back on. You say, well, I accomplished that. So this next one is going to be that much easier because I know what I'm capable of now. And I guarantee you, what you think are your physical limits or your spiritual limits or your emotional limits, what you think are your limits are not. Once you think you've reached your end, you're really only about 70% of the way there. And I've seen it time and time again, is that you have far more in you than you think that you're capable of. Is when you put yourself into a strenuous situation, that's when those capabilities, that potential turns on, and you literally start transforming into a better version of yourself, a different version of yourself. So that's what I talk about in that chapter. It's all about how to develop strength and how to take that strength and transform it into power as you affect the world around you.
Love it. I love it.
Lastly, so one of the final virtues I talk about is fortitude. And we've already kind of addressed this a little bit, but fortitude is what happens when you encounter hardships in your life. Hardships, suffering, those things that attack you, sometimes because of your own mistakes. I mean, you make a poor decision, something bad happens. Sometimes it's just because life is random and it's going to throw curveballs your way. But either way, understanding how to face that with fortitude. Do you fall into what's called, one extreme would be the victimhood mentality, the victim mindset, which is awfully popular in our modern culture. Blame others, blame the system, blame other groups of people, whatever it may be. Blaming. And it's not that that's always incorrect. Sometimes there are other people to blame, but the more that you shift responsibility onto others, the more you may make yourself feel better in the short term, but you're going to hamstring any opportunity, any capability you have of affecting that situation. When you put all the blame on somebody else, you also remove your own agency in solving the problem, solving the issue, and being able to become a better version of yourself through that adversity. So I talk about that, how to face challenges honorably and with strength and with fortitude. One extreme that I recommend avoiding is that victimhood mentality. The other extreme, and this is where I see a lot of military, especially as they get out of the military, fall into this extreme. And that's where, because you're taught such a radical form of responsibility when you're in the military, because it's required on the battlefield, you start to take responsibility to an extreme, and that you believe everything's your fault when you get back and in your daily life. And I call this kind of like the self-denigration, where everything that happens to you is your fault. And you start to think, I must be a terrible person, or I must be flawed in some irreparable way because of all these things going on in my life. And the problem with that is then it leads you to being hesitant to making future decisions, or to taking the lead in other areas of your life. Because if you believe that no matter what you do, something's going to turn out wrong, then why would you start making any decisions, right? And I see a lot of military kind of fall into this spiral, whether they have PTSD or whether they're unable to let go of some of the things in their past that happened on the battlefield. And my recommendation is to really sit down and have that honest conversation with yourself, and to recognize where you may have made some mistakes, but also recognizing that we live in a random world, and sometimes, to coin a phrase, shit happens, and that you're not responsible for it. Sometimes you're put in a stressful situation, and you make the best decision that you can in that situation, right? Now, you can't always judge the quality of a decision that you make based on its outcome. Sometimes you can, but not always. Sometimes you make the best decision that you can, and sometimes it turns out well, sometimes it turns out poorly, but you made the best decision that you could in that environment. right, in that situation. And this is what I would try to teach my Marines when I was in charge of, when I was a platoon leader, is, sometimes we would go out on a training event, they would make a decision, and it would not turn out well. It wouldn't be the best decision. And I would try to judge them like, okay, based on the information you had at the time, did you make the best decision that you could? And if you did that, then great. Then you did what you were supposed to do. It doesn't mean that we can't learn from it. We can't become better people. We can't, you can't learn how to make a better decision next time. But in the moment, you did the best that you could. And so that's what that chapter tries to unfold, is this idea of when hardship comes your way, how do you understand it? And also, how can we learn to understand the purpose of it? And we see this actually, I pull some examples from scripture, but a lot of times hardship and suffering can be used to develop character in our lives. And this is something that, like, the Apostle Paul points to multiple times, is that the suffering in his life, that thorn in his side, was used so that he could become a better tool for God and for his community and for the people around him. It wasn't just something that he had to work around or something he had to blame on other people. It was used in order to develop him into who he was meant to be. So that's the idea of fortitude. Those are the themes I explore in that chapter. Lastly, the last chapter is where I take these principles and I kind of try to make them applicable in our everyday life by kind of putting some meat on the bones. And that last chapter is pray for peace, prepare for war. And it's something that a saying that we say in the military all the time. It's that, yeah, we can pray for peace, you can hope for peace, but you prepare for war, because the best way to ensure peace in your life is to be prepared for the hardships when they do eventually come. Not if, but when. We all know that the storms are going to roll in our lives, and you can either choose to be prepared or you can choose to be unprepared, but that's a choice that you're making. And so that's what that chapter is about, is how do you be prepared in your life? How can you put some practical steps, some practical advice, some regular routines in your life in order to prepare yourself for war?
And I love how you named that last chapter too. Pray for peace, prepare for war. Mm-hmm. That is the reality of life. No matter how perfect you think it could be 24/7, it's not going to be. Doesn't matter if you're famous, doesn't matter if you're the common man, doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, or very political high up or very low on the totem pole. It doesn't matter. You have to prepare for the storm, because it will be coming. So yeah. I love that. I think that's the coolest title you have for any of your chapters there. Pray for peace, prepare for war. So cool.
Thank you.
But Jayson, yeah, this reawakening the warrior spirit. Mm-hmm. Such a fun concept. I think it's much needed in today's society. Like you said, I feel like a lot of people are getting soft. They're falling into these categories of, because I was born a certain way, or because I identify as a certain way, or because I fit in this mold or this group, I have to act a certain way too. That's never the case. Everyone is always individualistic. Just because somebody who is like you does something a certain way doesn't mean you always have to follow them. Come up with your own opinions, form your own attitudes, become the person that you want to become, and not just blindly follow. So yeah, Jayson, I appreciate you writing this book. Everyone, if you want to go check it out, you could actually find it on Amazon. Is there any other places you have it posted out right now?
So the primary place where it's for sale is on Amazon. They can also find me at my website, thewarriorjournal.com. And that will link it over, to Amazon if they want to purchase the book.
Perfect. So you guys heard him. Go check out Reawakening the Warrior Spirit on Amazon. So guys, after talking with Jayson, we actually have a little surprise for you. He's going to be giving away one copy of Reawakening the Warrior Spirit to you, the listeners of the Get Over Yourself podcast. Make sure to head over to my Instagram at GetOverYourself_podcast. We're going to be running that giveaway for the next couple days over there when this episode releases. So if you're listening to this episode right now, as it comes out on Friday at 9 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, make sure to once again go check out at GetOverYourself_podcast on Instagram. And we're going to be running that giveaway. One of you could be walking away with this copy. So if you resonated with anything in Jayson's message today, make sure to go check out at GetOverYourself_podcast on Instagram. Jayson, any final words before we close out today's episode?
No, man, I just want to say thanks. It's been a great conversation. Enjoyed chatting with you, and look forward to maybe speaking again in the future. But Yeah, really enjoyed the conversation. And I'm just encouraging everybody out there to reawaken their warrior spirit. Don't let life just pass you by. You got to actually choose to spend the time productively. You have to choose to be a warrior in your life and to affect the world around you in a positive way. That's a choice. You can either spend your time productively or you can waste your time, but the time is going to pass you by one way or another. So choose to intentionally become a warrior in your life. Be strong, speak with truth, serve those around you, have fortitude, and live an honorable life.
That is perfect. Guys, go check out the book. Thank you, Jayson, for joining us on today's episode of the Get Over Yourself podcast. And as always, everybody, if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to go leave us a 5-star review on whatever preferred streaming platform you're on. Also, if you know anybody who would benefit from hearing today's conversation, feel free to send it to them. You guys are my best form of marketing, and that's how I continue to grow this show. And with that all being said, we'll see you guys next time.